Recently, a group asked me to help them think about how they could work with the people they support to co-create curriculums. And it was, it's not one of those things I have an answer for, but it was an interesting one to think about. You ask questions like whose curriculum and what's the curriculum for and what's the point of a curriculum, and things that I would have loved as an undergraduate philosophy student. But I looked with them through my own journey, exploring these sorts of things. So when I did the Sensory Stories project, I would talk about, and I still do, how the stories are a really good way of hearing choice, because choice in the moment is a tricky thing for people with profound intellectual disabilities. You've seen me write about that elsewhere. But if I tell you a story and it has a particular smell in it and you don't really react, and I tell you that story consistently through time so you have a chance to understand what's going on and to respond, and you don't particularly react to that smell, and then I tell another story consistently through time and you really love the smell in that story, then I have heard through the telling of both of those stories the choice that you have made. And it's the structure and the clarity and the respect for processing time that enables that choice making. But it's not completely a choice, is it? Because it's two things I've chosen. I was the chooser at the start. So in the art project, there was no set end goal in mind. And actually, I didn't know. I remember the feeling of really not knowing what was going to happen with that one. Like, would their pictures be different? Would they? And the not having a determined output is probably a good litmus test for whether you are the agentic force in a situation or whether they are. I didn't know what was going to happen there. So what happened hasn't been done by me. Does that make sense? I put in structuring to help people understand the environment that they were working in, and to remove barriers to their independent engagement with materials. And one of the ways in which we tried to remove those barriers was by being more present. There was a little 2 minutes of mindfulness at the start of that project. And that little 2 minutes of mindfulness, we're all really busy. We've all got a lot to do. We've got a lot to think about. Nobody more so than me running the whole thing. And we would find ourselves looking to the person that we were there to support and looking for them to support us in being mindful. And that led to the Sensory Being Project. And the Sensory Being Project, I worked with teams of design students and teams of consultants. And the aim was to create something that would inspire a moment of sensory presentness, hold you in an entrancing sensory moment. And one of the ways in which we did that was the design team would think about what materials they might use, and then they'd bring them in to share with the consultant team, and the consultant team would give their feedback. And listening to feedback was a real skill, because sometimes, somebody will give you a really clear, easy to standardize piece of feedback, like they'll reach for a particular thing or they'll smile at something and you think, oh yeah, I know they like this. But other times you just get a feel for, and if you're paying attention and you're really present, you get an instinct, an attunement for. And so there was no determined output of that. And the choice making, decision making, meaning sharing wasn't a sort of clear point, yes, no. It was a shared, embodied listening, recognizing of all responses. And then after that, I did the Salon project. And the Salon project was a communicative space. So there were 3 spaces in that project. And the people who took part over time became familiar with the different spaces, and in the different spaces different things happened, and then they were able to choose between the spaces, and the way that choice was made was they were taken to a midpoint and then they were listened to. And if you look at there's a very short film of that project on my website and the little outputs that I did in relation to it. It's very much about respecting pre-existing communication. It's not about developing you to be a different communicator or extending your communication skills so you can make a choice. It is recognizing that you as a living person are communicating, and if we don't know what you're communicating, then it's on us to up our listening skills rather than on you to perform in any standardized ways. So it relied heavily on attunement. And then there was the PhD. And all of the others are situations I'd created. So we've gone from a choice between two things I've decided to a structuring environment where the output was unknown to a sort of semi-structured environment with total listening and an unknown output to an environment that is communicative and is a holding space for fully recognizing you as a communicating human, to not knowing. Almost total not knowing. I didn't set anything up. The point was, I did take in odd objects, but they weren't as relevant as I thought they were going to be. The point was to do the work on their turf, to do it through their meaning, recognizing their expression. So it's not just communication that I'm recognizing in the PhD, it's that their experience of meaning is likely to be other to my experience of meaning, and it begins from them as valid, not as defective, not as primitive or pre anything that they're about to be, just as is, recognizing you for who and how you are now, and recognizing different types of knowing, like this intellectual knowing where I can do facts and things like that, and that instinctual knowing and embodied knowing, and trying to experience their fields of meaning. And through them all there are these shifts. You start off looking for choice and you end up looking for experiences of meaning. Like at the start, when I'm offering you a choice between two things over 12 weeks of two different sensory stories, I've decided what the meaning is that you're going to share. You're going to tell me that you like this smell, not that smell. But by the time I'm doing the PhD, I don't know what meaning is to you. And I'm open not only to you communicating in your own way, but to you knowing in your own way. It moves from determined situations, choices, to uncertainty, to surprises, to total not knowing. And it involves a surrendering of power and control and a willingness to feel. And in that willingness to feel, a willingness to feel vulnerable, to feel exposed, to feel out of control, to feel discombobulated, to feel small in a landscape of meaning that you don't understand. So yeah, I just thought those shifts are interesting. The life of the sensory projects, I don't talk about the projects much as a collective, but you can see through the journey of the last 10 or so years how I'm playing with the same sorts of thinking that those people were. How do we make sure this is meaningful? Not necessarily our meaning, but yeah, how do we make sure that it's meaningful?